So Heather, thanks very much for agreeing to talk with me this afternoon. It's really lovely to have you here as the author of Attachment in the Classroom, which was the first book at Worth Publishing that we published back in very late 2005. And we launched it, if you might remember, at the Institute for Mental Health. And Sir Richard Bowlby was there and he spoke about it and was delighted to, on behalf of his father, really, Sir John Bowlby, he was so delighted to be able to say, here is a book at last that puts attachment fairly and squarely in the classroom. I don't know if you remember that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I do remember. Contact with the Bowlbys was really very exciting.
Yes, absolutely. So perhaps you could just tell us a little bit about your early career, really. I know you were a teacher and maybe some of the influences that led you to really seeing that attachment was such an important issue in schools.
Well, the interest in my career was I was challenged by children's behaviour and what they didn't know and how difficult it was they found learning. And it was when I worked in the social services unit that, which was called intermediate treatment. And it was for a group of young kids in their early teens who were totally out of the school system and offending and at tremendous risk. So I taught these 10 or 12 kids and I couldn't understand how they were so ignorant. How could you know so little about anything? And they had no idea how their body worked. They had no idea where they lived in relation to anywhere else. They just knew the bus was from there to the shopping centre. And they didn't understand history. They didn't know about when the war was, what war, they had no knowledge. And they were all having sexual activity, but they didn't know what they were doing or how babies were made. So they were at-risk kids profoundly. But I was fascinated. I thought, how on earth can you not know anything? And so I started a curriculum called Who Am I, Where Am I, and What Time Is It? And we had, I think, a great time. I got a skeleton hanging on the back of the little room door, the classroom door, and we did drawings, maps where they put their own house on the map, so they knew where they saw themselves in relation to other places. And it was as basic as that, learning about their body, where they lived, and time was significant. We paid a lot of attention to what time is it, and when did you do this, and when did you do that, and their own dates, the chronology was significant. But what I did when I was working there was train as an educational psychotherapist with the Kaspari Foundation, because they are absolutely in touch with all of this, and they are the ones who really explore the issues that affect children in school. And so that made all the difference as well. Well, educational psychotherapy is basically about clinical treatment. So the training is all based on psychoanalytic theory about human development and experience. But there are a few people rather, who'd begun to think of it in the school context. She could see that this was being acted out in the school setting and the implications for children in terms of their relationships and their relationships with each other and in the classroom. So she's the one who sowed the seeds, really, for me, of thinking about that.
Lovely. Yeah. And then you brought it to fruition with the learning triangle, really. That's great.
And actually knowing her was a delight. It really was.
Yeah, she was a lovely woman. I remember her. Yes. That's really lovely.
So it was the challenge of trying to address the issues that these kids had. And B, the information I derived from being taught educational psychotherapy. And the following work at the intermediate treatment unit, I then went into mental health services because I was an educational psychotherapist. So I went into child guidance and CAMS and all those teams. And that's when there were loads of cases referred by schools. So I used that as my sample. What is it that these kids demonstrate? What difficulties have they got that they explore, that they show in schools? And that when it became very evident to me that behaviour is a very significant form of communication. They couldn't articulate anything, so they acted it out. It was a completely unconscious process on their part, but their behavior was very expressive of the experiences they had had. And so John Bowlby's work, which is the best researched work I found at the time, was the most reliable source of research structure, in a sense. And so that's why I went into the attachment theory models. And they did apply to the behaviors that were referred to in these referrals and that I met in the schools and that teachers were talking about. And so that was the pathway, really, that led me to the Bowlby issue and attachment theory and how it might affect children in school. So in a sense, I didn't start off thinking about Bowlby. I arrived thinking about Bowlby as a result of all the referrals. I think one of the significant factors that emerged for me was what's called intergenerational reenactment. That it was easy to see these mothers as flawed and at fault and harmful and dangerous. But this is not a deliberate act of cruelty that mothers impart. This is how they reenact their experience of being children as well on their children, because all of us, the whole agenda we've got is based on our early experience as well. And so if people have challenging times in infancy that are not resolved or aware of, then they reenact it. So the baby triggers all of their memories of being a baby. Yeah, and I'm very much involved in an organization called School and Family Works. And they work with the mother and the child together in groups and working in schools in that sense. So it's appreciating this intergenerational reenactment that's significant. And that's linked, of course, to behavior as a communication.
Yes, can you say a bit more about that, behaviour as communication? Because you said that you began to see behaviour not just as a thing in itself and not children being bad, but of those children saying something to us through what they do, the acting out part, because they didn't have the words for it. Can you talk a bit more about that?
It's a very significant aspect of the communication by children who haven't been able to understand or articulate or be aware of what it is that drives them. So the child who in the classroom who suddenly experienced another pupil talking about how their mother had died, it triggered a huge reaction in her, and she went and attacked the child because, in a sense, the child triggered all of her unresolved issues about a lost parent. So that little girl didn't articulate that she understood it, she acted it out. And I think a lot of young people, especially adolescents, who don't have the capacity to articulate their anxieties and uncertainties, articulate it by acting it out on other people, by making other people feel afraid. Especially young gangs, I think. I think they're quite anxious, frightened young people. And they get together, and together they act out their unprocessed fears on other people. They become the threatening gang in the street. So I think if we step back from our reaction to behavior and wondered what it was about, then we might begin to make a difference.
And do you think that your training at Caspari, where you were training to be an educational therapist, you were obviously naturally reflective before you even got to Caspari, but do you think it helped you to develop that internal capacity to step back? Because I think that must be incredibly hard within a school. We know how busy schools are. Obviously, we're speaking to each other during COVID. It makes it even worse. But schools are incredibly busy places. So how did that educational therapy training help you to have the internal capacity to step back when the behavior is happening and is in your face?
Well, because it enhanced my awareness, I was less threatened by it, so to speak, less afraid of it. Because I remember being a teacher and coming out of the classroom almost in tears with despair, and going back to the staff room and wishing I could get some help and instead being told off for not doing it right. And so thinking about it is what made all the difference. Being able to think and reflect makes all the difference. And that's what I call stepping back. And of course, that's what the training is about. How do you think about it? And in what way do you think about it? So I think that's, yes, that's how it affected me, is simply
Yes.
thinking about it, all the theories and issues behind it. But
Yes,
certainly,
and it takes that degree of being able to just like hold the moment, doesn't it, really? Which I guess
it
is
takes the
why the
panic out of
support
it
we
as
need
well.
from colleagues and mindfulness and whatever else it is, just to be able to
Yes,
not act ourselves on the moment, not to react, but just to hold the moment and start to free our thinking processes again.
absolutely. And I think what the book is totally aimed at is saying it doesn't help to react. We have to reflect. So
Ah,
think about it rather than react to it. And a lot of the policies that are used in schools are about reacting to it. What do you do when it happens? What do you do? Where do you put them? Where do they go? What do you say? How do you do it? Do it, punish them, exclude them, whatever.
yeah.
It's a reaction rather than a reflection. So a lot of the work I did was with teachers, and my experience of that was when you enabled them to step back and think about it, made far fewer referrals to the mental health services
Mm,
because they became more proactive themselves, in a sense, in enabling the children to feel understood.
mm.
The beginnings of that. And of course, it's all about not being a therapist as a teacher, it's about being a better teacher. Because what you want to do is enable the children to learn. You're not just there to punish them for being wrong.
I mean, I remember in those very early days, because Attachment in the Classroom came out in 2005. And I know that at that time, Worth Publishing was going to many different conferences. We were meeting many different people, and there were a lot of attachment lectures around.
Yes.
And people would say things to us about, like, I love this attachment stuff. It's really marvelous. Attachment theory is obviously really great. But what do you do with it? What do you do about it? How do I get it into the classroom? And I think that's why your book has been so significant and why it's so loved, really, is because you gave us this structure of the learning triangle. And
Yes.
that helped us to really transpose what's going on at home and
Yes.
then see it in the classrooms.
Well, you've drawn the parallel. The infant's relationship with the parent engages them or enables them to relate to other issues. But if the relationship with the parent is the focus of the child because it's not providing them with what they need and they're feeling anxious and confused or disturbed by it, then engagement with other issues is going to be very unlikely. So it's very much like the domestic experience they have of early months and years is the relationship enables you to engage in the outside world. And so that's the task. The task symbolizes the outside world. And because teachers have a need to present the curriculum in a variety of ways, which makes it accessible to everybody, this differentiation, then it enables them to focus on that because that's their skill. They're good at presenting information in a way that enables the children to learn, providing they understand what it is that's disabling the learning. And that's why the different groups have a different approach in terms of the task. Yeah, yeah.
I think you've made it very clear that where there is a secure child, they are able to relate to both teacher and task because in their home environment, they were able to relate to the parent, but they
Yes.
equally felt secure to turn to the outside world and they didn't feel that they were going to lose their parental affection or
That's right.
interest or
That's
whatever.
right.
So that
Or,
child coming into school has a really strong sense of trust, don't they, that they can then transfer to this other new adult, the teacher.
they can turn to the adult for support. If they feel challenged, ask the teacher. They can do that because they've learned through experience that the adult is a reliable source of support and compassion. If they feel troubled or distressed by something, they will understand. That's their experience, secure attachment.
Do you know what it makes me think is that children who are securely attached in like that have got such a profound start in life, such a profoundly positive start in life, haven't they? And they have so much advantage already. The privilege of being secure.
That's the real privilege in life. Is not how much your money you're born with, but how emotionally healthy your environment is. And that's what I would recall a very very fortunate pupil, and which will make a success of life.
Yeah.
To blame children for their behavior or their inadequacies, because no one can choose how they start in life. No one can choose who they are or where they start.
Or who their parents are, or who their parents were or weren't. Yes.
Exactly. Yes. And what the intergenerational history is that they have to live with. Yeah.
Over time, you must have seen teachers who began to get to grips with these issues, and teachers who were able to make a difference. So what do you think, what qualities do teachers who can really grasp this behavior as communication message, what kind of qualities do you think that they find in themselves that really helps this work?
Well, I actually find that most teachers have a very basic interest in children's well-being, because they every day they spend their working lives with a group of children whom they become very involved with. And inevitably, most of the teachers I encounter express this sympathetic interest in children, even though they do often react profoundly in a negative way to the very threatening, challenging behavior of the minority, which is understandable. And a teacher works more successfully in this respect when they work in a setting where you can think about things. And very often it's the head teacher is a critical figure, because if the head teacher can support and encourage thinking, the teachers can do that. Mm-hmm. And very often in the early days of working in schools, my colleague and I decided we could only work in a school if the head teacher understood it. And that made all the difference, all the difference. So a sympathetic head is the one who, in a sense, sets the climate for the children in the school. And also, given that they are, in a sense, in charge of the environment, they're a very significant person to the child, because one of the core issues about children in school is feeling safe. And it's the head teacher and the staff who create an environment that is safe for the children to experience. Yeah.
Yes, as you say, experience safety, because it's fine if people say that it's safe, but the child has got to experience it safe. That this thing Porges, I think, calls felt security. If you actually feel it and you experience it, then your brain can become calmer and you can begin to connect in relationship rather than just being in defensive hypervigilance. So yeah, that's absolutely critical, isn't it? So what would you say if you were a lone young teacher or an older teacher, if you were a lone teacher in a school which was saying, no, we must go for zero tolerance? What would you say to that one teacher? Because they might say, well, yes, it's lovely for those people who've got a great sympathetic head, but my head is out for zero tolerance. What would you say to that?
I would think twice about the job myself.
Well, let's say they need to do the job.
But I think they just have to go on defending their point of view, I'm afraid. It sounds like quite a threatening situation to work in, but I think, because I've worked in situations where as I say, I walked into the staff room in tears, and I was more or less told to shut up and I should do a better job. But that was from a particular teacher who couldn't tolerate any kind of sympathy for children who weren't succeeding. And there are some of us who cannot tolerate this empathy for children. So I'm afraid it does exist. Yes.
Well, I'm guessing that also has come from some failure of empathy towards them at some point.
Exactly.
I mean, I get,
their experience of being in school, probably. Yes.
Because there's triggering, isn't there, in multiple domains, really, and the adults can be triggered just as much as parents can be triggered by children as well.
We all are. Yes. Yes. And my empathy, I don't know if I can divert into this, but my empathy for the children who are failing in school is because, in my very humble working class background, my friends in my street, my best friend, did very badly in primary school, and she was humiliated and strapped and beaten by the teacher because she couldn't learn. And I was lucky enough to be able to learn, and I've always, I think, wanted to make up for what was treated, how she was treated. Well, that was in the olden days. And there was a lot of punishment in schools in terms of strapping and poor behavior.
When you say strapping, you mean being hit with a strap for not being able to learn?
So I always feel in my heart But that's what I'm trying to do.
Being able to say sorry to this friend, that's a fantastic legacy that you've created, Heather, really, because so many other children have benefited from the work that you have done, and so many professionals have told us how wonderful it is to be able to read a book like Attachment in the Classroom, because it is so crystal clear how you make that transposition from the family environment into the school context. So super helpful. So thank you so much for all that amazing hard work you've been doing. Let's just think about you in general. Are you a reader? Do you like reading books?
Yes.
Do you always have books on the go?
Yes, well, I'm in a book club. So I get told what to read by and large. The last really good book I read that I loved was Hamnet. And it's a story, well, a novel about Shakespeare's son who died. So that was very compelling. I love novels that really do relate to human experience. I'm not just interested in thrillers and things that happen. I'm interested in how well people write about people. Yeah.
And do you remember any particular books or stories when you were a child that have stayed with you?
The first book I ever read was Alice in Wonderland. I adored Alice in Wonderland, and then Through the Looking Glass. I read it over and over again. Absolutely loved it. It was the only book in the house, so it was the best thing I could do. And then I discovered a library, and then I could have whatever I wanted. So I just went around the shelves and picked books off the shelves. Yeah.
As an author, Heather, how do you feel about writing?
I actually rather like writing. I rather enjoy it, I think. And what I like to do is to make things as clear as possible. It's why I don't like the Dickens stories now. And I felt that I was on a mission to make as much support, give as much support as possible to the teacher in school, without having to go through the incredible journey I'd been through psychoanalysis, to make that evident for all of us. And my biggest disappointment, actually, in terms of writing, is in the newspapers when they will report on crisis and events, but they never wonder why it happened. And I've often wondered why we don't ask the question, why? Why did they do this? Because it's blame and criticism and imprisonment might stop the issue, but it doesn't cure the problem.
No.
You have to understand more why things go on.
Yes. Okay, and finally, I suppose I'd like to ask you what changes you've seen in education, and I know you've been very involved with children and children's well-being for these last 20 years, really, haven't you? And since you wrote the book in 2005 until now, have you seen any progress in education towards do you feel there is greater understanding of attachment, or greater understanding of the principles of behaviour as communication? Do you think there is greater, or I mean, how do you feel about it now? Do you have hope for it?
I did see that, but I think I'm terribly disheartened by what's happened to educational policy in the last few years. I think it's gone as backwards as you can get, and just simply emphasizing achievement and performance as the measure of a school's is not going to acknowledge the skill that these teachers have in enabling pupils who are struggling to learn. Teachers are going to be pressed into the role of teaching children to pass exams. And that's as archaic as it gets, I think, because we've got to respect, that children have a great number of skills. The number of men who've built our society based on their practical, technical skills is phenomenal. And we should reward and appreciate them as much as we appreciate anybody with a degree in economics. That's how I believe in it. And so I think apprenticeship is just as important as a degree. So I'm a bit disheartened by the state of education at the moment. And we did go through Parliament, and we did get it passed that all teachers should have a training in social and emotional development of children. They passed it in the House of Lords. They passed it, and it was accepted by the Department for Education. And I'm afraid since then it's been worn away by current policy, which I think is absolutely disastrous.
But you did actually get that into law, didn't you? And so that actually that access to education is there, and it is enshrined in law, and perhaps within teacher training colleges, where we're delighted that attachment in the classroom does inform some teachers, but it's just, it's not enough, is it? And it's written into various documents like the DFE guidance, for example, for designated teachers working with looked after children. They refer to attachment awareness, they refer to trauma-informed practice. But when it doesn't get disseminated, or where the teachers are having to overly focus on SATs and targets and so forth, then it gets pushed to the margins, doesn't it? And I guess, again, we're talking during COVID, and so just the immense need to be able to understand behaviour as communication. There couldn't be a better time than now to really hear that message loud and clear.
Yes.
Okay, so Heather, thank you so much. Is there anything you would like to say to the educators of today as a sort of final word on this part?
Keep going. Keep going, because schools are very critical places. Every child has to pass through a school. So schools are the most critical place where children experience the world outside of home from the age of sometimes just 4 onwards, despite nursery school. And I do feel that we should have a greater respect for teachers than we do. I think they're a bit like the men working on buildings and building wonderful structures. These are a critical part of our society, and we need to acknowledge that. And I don't think we do. I don't think we respect them enough.
The crucial significance of teachers, and then the other element that you were leaving us with, which was don't react, reflect. I think that was your other byword, wasn't it? So let's treasure teachers and let's build that space in so that reacting isn't the first port of call. There's sufficient support and thinking space to be able to reflect.
And the whole school practice needs to reflect secure attachment. They need to be safe. Children need to be noticed. They need to be respected. And they need to be understood. And I think schools all need to be able to do that in order to enhance their intellectual development and their cognitive awareness. Yeah. These are not bad children. They're children who have no experience of how to cope with their fear. And that's what they do. Yeah. And so that's why we need to be supportive of children, of teachers rather. We need to have support groups for teachers where they can talk about these things and share their experiences. I think it's absolutely critical that teachers don't carry this, because one of the features of children's behaviour as well is that if you ask teachers how they feel at the end of the day, they express the most extraordinary experiences. They're not just tired, they feel sad, lonely, disregarded, disrespected, and you wonder what they've absorbed from the children. Because there's a process called projection, whereby we can make other people feel our feelings, even though we don't acknowledge them. We actually transmit our feelings to other people. And so the teacher, as a sensitive person, trying to tune into the child, can take that in and go home wondering why they feel so bad. So we need to encourage them to ask themselves, what feelings have I got at the end of the day, and whose might they be? So we need to give teachers the chance to think about what's happened in the day. So we need weekly sessions where teachers talk to each other and share their experiences and support each other. Because it's a critical job. If everybody in the population passes through a school, imagine what teachers experience in the course of the day. Yeah. So and that's why I think teachers are very critical people, critical in the sense of significant in the community, and need all kinds of thought and support themselves.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Angela. Thank you. Thank you, Worth Publishing.